Masha had always believed that children saw things clearly because they had not yet learned the reasons not to. Adults accumulated reasons. Reasons not to speak. Reasons not to ask. Reasons not to cross the invisible lines that organize social space into zones of appropriate and inappropriate, and the long careful distances that people maintained between themselves and strangers. Children had not yet received the full inventory of reasons, and so they simply looked at things and said what they saw, and the accuracy of it was sometimes uncomfortable and sometimes devastating, and occasionally, in the way of things that cut through everything unnecessary, exactly what was needed. She had said this to her daughter Vera many times, not as instruction but as observation, because Vera at 5 years old was already demonstrating a capacity for direct perception that Masha found both wonderful and occasionally inconvenient. Vera saw things. Vera said what she saw. The combination was not always comfortable for the people around them, but it was consistently honest, and Masha had decided long ago that she would rather raise a child who was honest than one who was comfortable. She had not anticipated that this quality would find its fullest expression on a rainy Tuesday evening in October at the corner table of Café Zvezda on Nikolskaya Street. Masha worked at Café Zvezda. She had worked there for 2 years, 5 evenings a week, in the particular uniform of the place, white shirt and tan apron. Her auburn hair pinned up with a pencil because it was practical, and she had stopped caring about practical things looking impractical some time ago. She was 30 years old, and she had a daughter and a small apartment and a morning job at a bookkeeping firm and an evening job at the cafe, and the particular arithmetic of a life built on 2 incomes that almost added up to enough and required constant management to ensure the almost did not become something worse. She was not unhappy. She wanted to be clear about that, to herself at least. She was tired in the way of people who work hard and sleep insufficiently, but she was not unhappy. She had Vera. She had the bookkeeping which she was good at and which satisfied the part of her that liked things to balance. She had the cafe which she did not love but which she had made peace with in the way you make peace with things that serve a necessary function. She had enough. Vera came to the cafe on Tuesday evenings. This was a practical arrangement born of necessity. Masha's neighbor Galina, who watched Vera on the other evenings, had a standing Tuesday commitment that she could not move, and the alternative was a childcare cost that the arithmetic did not support. So on Tuesdays Vera came to the cafe at 6 and sat in the small back booth with her drawing things and her books and her water with a slice of lemon, and she occupied herself with the focused self-sufficiency of a child who had been doing this long enough to have a system. The arrangement worked because Vera was genuinely self-sufficient, and because the cafe's owner, a woman named Tatiana who was practical and not unkind, had decided that a quiet child in the back booth was not a problem she needed to address. It had worked for 8 months without incident. And then the man started coming on Tuesdays. He had appeared 6 weeks ago. Always on a Tuesday. Always at the same table, the corner one by the Rain Street window that looked out at the street, the table that was slightly separate from the others and that the regulars tended to leave because it was drafty when the door opened. He always came at 7:30. He always ordered the same thing, the pasta with the cream sauce and a glass of water and coffee after. He always had his phone on the table, and he always looked at it less than people who put their phones on tables usually did, which Masha had noticed because she noticed things about the regulars without making an effort to. He was perhaps 35, dark-haired, with a kind of face that was arranged well and that he appeared to be entirely unaware of, which was itself a quality she found notable. He wore suits that were clearly expensive and that he wore with the ease of someone for whom they were simply clothes rather than a statement. He had a watch. He tipped well, not ostentatiously but genuinely, the tip of someone who understood what the work was worth rather than the tip of someone performing generosity. He ate alone every Tuesday. He ate with the particular quality of someone who was feeding themselves because it was necessary rather than because it was pleasurable, mechanically and without the small enjoyments that eating in a good cafe could provide if you allowed it to. He looked out the Rain Street window a great deal. He looked at his phone occasionally. He did not look around the cafe in the way of someone who was hoping to be noticed or spoken to. He was simply there, and then he was gone, and the table was clean and the tip was there, and that was all. Masha had served him every Tuesday for 6 weeks, and they had exchanged exactly the words required for the transaction: his order, her confirmation, his thank you, her you are welcome, and nothing beyond that, which was the appropriate professional register and which she maintained without difficulty because she was good at her job and her job did not require her to have opinions about the people she served. She had opinions anyway. She always had opinions. She simply kept them where they belonged, which was inside her head and occasionally in the brief conversations she had with Tatiana at the end of shifts when the cafe was empty and they were stacking chairs. Her opinion about the man at the corner table was simple and she had not examined it extensively. She thought he was lonely in the specific way of people who are surrounded by a great deal of life and have somehow ended up outside of it, not by dramatic misfortune but by the slow accumulation of circumstances that prioritized other things until the other things were all there was. She recognized this kind of loneliness because she had been adjacent to it herself, not inside it but near enough to understand its shape. She had not said any of this. She had brought his pasta and his water and his coffee after, and she had said you are welcome, and that was all. It was Vera who said something. Masha was at the counter at 7:53 on a Tuesday in October, entering an order, when she looked up and saw that the back booth was empty. She looked around the cafe. Vera was standing at the corner table. She was standing in her pink dress with her long blonde hair loose around her shoulders and her hands on the edge of the table, and she was looking at the dark-haired man with the direct, unfiltered attention she gave to everything she found worth looking at, and she was saying something. Masha was across the cafe in the time it took to put down the order pad. She arrived at the corner table to hear the end of what Vera was saying, which was, and she says it is important to notice the people who are by themselves because they are the ones who need noticing the most. The man was looking at Vera with an expression that Masha could not immediately categorize. Not discomfort exactly. Not the polished tolerance that adults sometimes performed for children in public. Something more genuine than either of those. The expression of someone who had been reached by something they had not been expecting and was still working out what to do with the fact of being reached. Masha said, "Vera." She said it in the voice that meant come here immediately please without specifying why. Vera looked at her mother with the expression of someone who does not believe they have done anything wrong and is prepared to make this case. The man said, "Please." He said it to Masha. He said, "She was not bothering me." Masha looked at him. He said, "She was telling me that nobody should eat alone every night." He paused. He said, "She is correct." Masha said to Vera, "What did I tell you about going to tables that are not yours?" Vera said, "You told me not to bother the customers." She considered this. She said, "I did not think he was bothered." She looked at the man. She said, "Were you bothered?" He said, "No." Vera looked at her mother with the expression of someone whose case has just been made for them by a reliable witness. Masha looked at her daughter. She looked at the man. She looked at the rain on the window and the empty table and the coffee cup and the phone face down beside it. She said, "I am sorry." She is direct. He said, "I noticed." He said it without irony. He said, "What is her name?" Masha said, "Vera." He said, "Vera." He looked at the child with something in his face that was moving through several registers that Masha was watching without appearing to watch. He said, "Your mother is right that you should not go to tables that are not yours." He said, "But you were also right about what you said. So perhaps both things can be true." Vera considered this with the serious attention she gave to logical propositions. Then she said, "Yes. I think that is fair." She went back to her booth. Masha looked at the man. She said, "I am sorry." He said, "Please stop apologizing." He said it gently. He said, "She said something true. There is nothing to apologize for in that." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Can I get you anything else?" He said, "Actually." He paused in the way of someone making a small decision. He said, "She said nobody should eat alone every night." He said, "I have been eating alone every Tuesday for 6 weeks." He looked at Masha with the same quality of attention he had given Vera, direct and without agenda. He said, "I do not know if this is appropriate to ask." He said, "If it is not, please tell me and I will not ask again. But when your shift ends, if you have not eaten, I would like to buy you supper. Both of you." He looked toward the booth where Vera had returned to her drawings. He said, "I think your daughter would like that. And I think I would too." Masha stood at the corner table in her white shirt and tan apron with the pencil in her hair and the rain on the window behind him, and she thought about appropriate and inappropriate and the long careful distances that adults maintained between themselves and strangers. She thought about Vera saying that nobody should eat alone every night. She thought about her mother who had said the same thing in different words, that you should notice the people who were by themselves because they were the ones who needed noticing the most. She thought about the arithmetic of her life that almost added up to enough and the small booth at the back and the 5 evenings a week and the tired that was not unhappy but was very tired. She said, "My shift ends at 9. He said, "I will be here." She said, "Her name is Vera and she will talk a great deal and ask questions about everything and you should know that before you commit to the arrangement." He said, "I have not talked a great deal to anyone in a considerable time. I think I can manage the questions." She looked at him one more time. Then she said, "All right." She picked up his empty coffee cup. She said, "I will bring you more coffee while you wait." He said, "Thank you." She went back to the counter and put the cup under the machine and allowed herself one moment of standing very still with her hand on the counter, and her eyes looking at nothing in particular and feeling the particular feeling of something shifting that had been in the same position for a long time. Then she poured the coffee and took it to the corner table and went back to work. At 9 o'clock she took her apron off and unpinned her hair and went to the back booth and said to Vera, "We are going to have supper with someone." Vera said, "The man by himself." Masha said, "Yes." Vera said, "I knew you would say yes." Masha said, "How did you know that?" Vera said, "Because you look at him the same way you look at the books you want to read but have not started yet. Like you are deciding if it is the right time." Masha looked at her daughter for a moment with the particular mixture of feelings that Vera regularly produced in her, something between astonishment and recognition and the faintly vertiginous sensation of being seen accurately by someone who was 5 years old and had no idea how accurately they were seeing. She said, "Put your drawings away." Vera put her drawings away. His name was Alexei Voronov, and she learned this at the table over plates of food that he ordered for all three of them with the attention of someone who had been eating in this cafe long enough to know the menu properly, which many had been coming here longer than 6 Tuesdays and had simply not been on her section before. He told her this with a slight expression that might have been embarrassment if he was someone who embarrassed easily, which he did not appear to be. He said, "I have been coming here for 2 years. He said, "I noticed you approximately 3 months ago, and it took me 6 Tuesdays on your section to reach the point of doing anything about it." He said this with the plain honesty of someone who did not see the point of managing impressions. Vera said, "That is a very long time to think about something." He said, "I know. I am working on it." Vera said, "My mama also thinks about things for a long time before she does them." Masha said, "Vera." Vera said, "It is true." Alexei looked at Masha with something warm and entirely present in his expression. He said, "It is all right." He said, "I think we have established that she says true things." Masha looked at her daughter and then at the man across the table and at the rain on the window behind him and the warm light of the cafe around them and the 3 plates of food and the coffee cups and the particular quality of an ordinary Tuesday evening that had shifted, quietly and without announcement, into something she was going to remember. She thought about what Vera had said. That she looked at him like the books she wanted to read but had not started yet. Like she was deciding if it was the right time. She thought that the right time was a thing you spent a great deal of energy trying to identify, and that it very rarely announced itself as clearly as you hoped, and that the most honest definition of the right time was probably simply the moment when you stopped waiting for it to announce itself and started anyway. She thought this was that moment. She said to Alexei, "What do you do on Tuesdays? Before you come here?" He said, "I work." He said, "I run a company." He said it without the weight that some people put on such information, not as a statement of significance but as a simple fact about how he spent his time. He said, "The company takes a great deal of Tuesday. Most of the other days as well." She said, "And after here? What do you do after here?" He said, "I go home." She said, "Alone?" He said, "Yes." He said it without self-pity, only as the accurate description it was. Vera said, "That is too many alone things for one day." He looked at the child. Something moved through his face that was complete and unguarded, the expression of someone who has been in the presence of an accurate observation and has no defense against it and does not particularly want one. He said, "Yes." He said, "I think you are right about that." Vera looked at her mother with the expression of someone whose work here is done. Masha looked at Alexei Voronov, who ran a company and ate alone on Tuesdays and had been coming to this cafe for 2 years and had needed 6 weeks on her section to do anything about the noticing, and she thought that some things took the time they took and that the time they took did not make them less worth arriving at. She said, "Next Tuesday. If you are coming anyway. You could sit in the back booth with Vera while I finish my shift." She said, "She will ask you a great deal of questions and tell you a great deal of things and show you all her drawings, and you should know that going in." He said, "I would like that." Vera said, "I have a drawing of a horse that I think you will like specifically." He said, "I look forward to it." Outside the cafe, the rain continued to do what October rain did in Moscow, steady and indifferent and entirely unconcerned with what was happening on the other side of the glass. Inside, the warm light held the 3 of them at the corner table, and the coffee was hot and the food was good, and Vera was explaining the horse drawing in considerable detail to a man who was listening with the complete attention of someone who has not had enough of this and understands now how much he has been missing it. Masha sat across from them both and felt the arithmetic of her life doing something it did not usually do. Adding up to more than enough.